My name is Serafino. I'm going to talk a little bit about object-oriented JavaScript. This one's going to be kind of dense. We're all familiar with the prototype pattern. It's pretty simple. You start out with a constructor function, you initialize all your variables, and then you add your member methods to the prototype. You can do inheritance this way using the prototype chain. Your inherited methods, and then instance of works out. Sometimes try to get fancy with this, maybe use an object literal or something, but there's drawbacks. You might also want to try to do something like this, but again, that doesn't work. So, object.create, I thought, oh, well, I could just use that, and then I can say new customer, but then what happens is this constructor function doesn't get called when you try to create your object with new. So the member variables don't get initialized. So I want to modify this object.create. This is Douglas Crockford's shim for the object.create function. It just gives you a function. Whatever object you pass in, it attaches as a prototype to the function. So all your methods, you pass in an object literal with methods on it, and that gets attached to the constructor function. You say new function. So if you provide me a constructor, I'm going to create a function right here. So if you actually provide me a constructor on the prototype, I'm going to give you back that constructor. So when you say new, you're actually calling your own constructor. And you can do this. The anonymous enclosure, seen this before? You're supposed to use it now to avoid clobbering the global namespace. Anything you put in here, it doesn't get, it's not accessible from the outside. So this is actually a way that you can create private methods. Create your class with classify, and then anything inside this closure can access this function. You can call the function as if it's a member of your class, but you can't access this function from the outside. So now let's look at private variables. This is something I found when I was researching called the private store. It's basically just an array. It's also inside your anonymous closure. And then every instance of your object creates another object to store its private member variables and adds it to the array. And then it also holds on to a handle to where you can find those private members. It's really ugly to access it. So I wrote this little convenience method. There's my mouse. And you just access your private variables like that. Let's clean it up a little bit. So there's at the top, this object is going to become your prototype, and then you can add your public methods to it. You can mix in your private methods, and then you just return it as a class. You can do inheritance here. Here's an object that inherits from customer. It doesn't inherit yet. Now it does. All we did was, instead of having this object literal up here, the empty object literal, we put customer on the prototype chain. Let's throw in some protected members. It's pretty easy to simulate a protected member. You just throw an exception if the function is called from any context outside an object that inherits from customer. And then you can abstract that out into a function that you just call at the top of any of your member methods that you want to become protected. You can do function overriding, just override the function by replacing it. You can call your base class constructor. You can even call overridden methods from the methods that override them. That's kind of... so here's all the things that we can do with this pattern. We have public and private methods, prototypal inheritance, elegant class definitions, protected methods. It's twice as fast and 10 times as small as like the classical pattern or the module pattern. You don't have an init method anymore. You just call new and it automatically calls your constructor that you provide. It also provides you with a default constructor. If you can't afford a constructor, one will be provided for you. And the best part is it's not another clunky framework. Most of the frameworks that provide object-orientedness in JavaScript, they actually make it even more inefficient and even more cumbersome to code. And here's a little comparison between the different ways of doing it. Any questions?
So when you're using jQuery, I believe that they have some internal mechanism to allow you to call new jQuery, and it operates the exact same as if you hadn't used new. Do you understand how that works? Is that similar to like one of the slides that you presented there?
Are you talking about calling a constructor function without using the new keyword?
Right.
I didn't show how to do that here, but the way you do that is as the first line in your constructor. You say that if this isn't an instance of my object, then return new my object.
Okay.
So I have a question. It sounded like in, I think, 2 slides ago, you kind of compared this to some of the ECMA 6 stuff. Is that correct, or am I wrong in that interpretation?
I actually didn't know that there was going to be a presentation about ECMA 6. A lot of that stuff is really cool, and I can't wait to see it. In the meantime,
Yeah.
I have to wait to see it.
But it sounds like, I mean, it's kind of the same concept. Like you said, the ECMA 6 stuff is just sugar. It's just, you know, yeah, which is kind of what this is, but at least that's in the language. I'd be curious to see how they compare.
thank you.